Currently we are still in Module 4, Polynomial Functions and Equations. And in this video we're going to go through the second part of Part 1, Operations on Polynomials. And so that's the objective we're working through, Objective 2, Performing Operations on Polynomials. Now, I'm going to break this objective up into two videos. So the first video I'm going to show you how to add and subtract, and in the next video I'm going to show you how to multiply polynomials. So that's one of the goals to consider while watching these videos, is to be able to understand the steps necessary to add, subtract, and multiply polynomials. And then the second goal is to be able to name the polynomial you get in your final answer based off of the knowledge you gained when working through the video and practice of Objective 1, naming polynomials. So let's begin. In Objective 2, there's two situations or three actually, adding, subtracting, and multiplying. I'm going to show you for adding and subtracting the subtracting example, because subtracting a polynomial will get, at times, will get a little bit confusing when working with the plus and minuses, and sometimes the signs change for the term of the second polynomial. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. In addition, is a little bit more straightforward. I'm going to do example 2, and then I will have you try example 3. And I've laid out the steps you need to take when working through this process of performing an operation on two polynomials. So again, I have identified 1 and 2 polynomials in my first example. The first polynomial, and you should be able to consider this information now, or these two key features. The highest power of the first polynomial is 4, right here, and it has 3 terms. In the second polynomial, the highest power is still 4, and it also has 3 terms, but there are some differences between the two, and we'll find those out as we work through it. And again, I'm going to take this step by step and show all my work, so I expect that your work looks very, very similar to mine to be successful with this skill. And so for number 2, the first step, if I was to analyze these two polynomials, is I would need to identify like terms. And I wrote up here, so please write this down too, that like terms are based on the variable of that term and the variable's exponent. That's what makes terms alike. And I'm going to read this left to right like a book. And that's very important because that'll help me not get confused with my signs, plus or minus. And so the first leftmost term is 6b to the 4th. And so I'm going to identify and see in step 1 if it has a like term in polynomial 2. And so 6b to the 4th, I need to look in polynomial 2 at the variable and the power of the terms. And in this case, there is a b to the 4th over here as well. And it's 7b to the 4th. So 6b to the 4th does indeed have a like term. And this is step 1 up here I'm going to be working through. And then I'm also going to interchanging with step 2 as well along the way. So step 2 then, after I've identified a like term, is to combine like terms by reading left to right. Again, very important that you read it left to right. So 6b to the 4th, and then 6b to the 4th minus. The operation is subtraction, so it's minus. I put minus a positive 7b to the 4th. In this, when I do this math, then I'm only dealing with the coefficients of subtracting the coefficients in front of the variables. So I have a 6 minus a 7. That gives me a -1, and then it's b to the 4th for this term. So I have combined my b to the 4th terms, and that means I'm done with them in my original polynomial. So I can go ahead and cross those out. Let's move on to the next term, and I'll do this one in blue. I have a -b squared. I have to look in polynomial 2 to see if there's a variable with a power of 2 in it. And in this case, there is a -3b squared. They both have the power of 2. The variables do. And so, in this case, whenever it's a subtraction of a term in the polynomial, I have to include that minus sign in my math that I do in step 2. Same thing over here. So I have a -b squared. And then the operation itself between the two polynomials is subtraction, so I write minus. And then it is a negative because it's a -3b squared within that polynomial. So another negative, and then it's 3b squared. That's why reading left to right is so very important, so I don't get my signs mixed up. And then again, to do this math, I have to look at the coefficients. And again, if the coefficient isn't written, we can assume that it's 1 in front of that variable. And then I just work with the coefficients to do this math. So I have a -1 minus a -3. And you should remember that when you minus a negative, it turns into positive. So -1 plus 3 is a positive 2b squared. So I'm done with my b squared terms. I can cross those out as well. Finally, there's one term left in each polynomial. And again, the leftmost term that is still remaining is this -5b to the third. So I have to see in polynomial 2 if there is a variable with the power of 3 with it to be alike with this term. And in this case, the only term left in this polynomial is 5b. It is to the first power. So these are not the same. The -5b to the third and this +5b to the first. I can't combine those. I just have to include them in my final answer as is. So I'm going to include this one equals, I'll continue this pattern right here in step 2 just to make my work look nice and neat. And again, I have to include the negative or the minus sign with it, a -5b cubed. And then finally, I have to include this term in my final answer as well. It is a 5b to the 1, but again, it is on the second half. It is part of polynomial 2, which is being subtracted from polynomial 1. And so this subtraction sign still interacts with this term. It's this polynomial minus this term. So that minus of that term turns the +5b into a -5b. That's why, again, it's so important to read it left to right so you get the correct signs, plus or minus, with your final answer. At this point, I am done with steps 1 and step 2. I identified all like terms and I combined all like terms reading left to right. Now, my final step is to rewrite the polynomial in standard form and then name it. So, in order to do that, standard form is the highest power to the lowest power. The highest power, and from step 2, is the power of 4. So that term is -1b to the 4th. Then my next highest power is the power of 3. So then my next term that I write in standard form is -5b cubed. Moving along, the next power is 2, and it's a +2, so I write plus 2b squared. And then finally, my last term is the linear term 1 minus 5b. And then to name this, the highest power is 4, so I know it to be quartic. If you don't remember that, you can refer back to Objective 1's practice work. And we didn't talk about this, and it's okay that we didn't, but there's 4 terms, and so I'm just going to call this a quartic 4-term polynomial. And I am done. At this point, please pause the video and do number 3 on your own. And then after that, I'm going to work out number 3 so you can check your work exactly like mine to make sure that you know that you're doing this the right way that you need to be doing to solve something like this correctly. At this point, you should have paused the video and tried number 3 on your own. And I have just worked out number 3. I showed all the steps, step 1 right here, step 2, and then finally the third step, rewriting it in standard form, and have named it as a quadratic trinomial. So please check your work to see that it matches mine. If it does not, then please raise your hand so that we can go over the steps to make, again, so that we can ensure that you have mastered this before moving on to your own practice.